If you get value out of this video, please like, subscribe, and hit that bell. Let's get on to the video.
You're listening to the Diagnosed Podcast, where every diagnosis has a story, and every story deserves to be heard. From survivors to loved ones, we explore the journey together with your host, Albano.
All right, here we go. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story. You have quite an interesting story, and I know a little bit of it because we are cousins. So thank you for joining us today, Steve.
Happy to be here.
Good. Okay, so let's jump right into the beginning. Okay, so it was your wife that was diagnosed, and before we get into any of that, I'd like to actually learn a little bit about you or our listeners, a little bit about your story. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, let's go way back and even way before you met Maggie. Tell us about your childhood, where you grew up, your family, and let's learn a little bit about you before we get into any of that.
Yeah, great. So as you mentioned, of course we are cousins. So, our stories, go back quite a ways, probably, and go back even before us, of course, your dad, my dad being brothers. We grew up, I spent most of my, I guess, early childhood years up in a small town. And, we moved there, we left the family, but my parents they wanted a different life. They wanted a small town life. They didn't want the big city life anymore. And so my dad had been working up at the Bruce Point power plant for about a year. And eventually push came to shove and we decided, it was time to stop the commute and move the family, move me and at that point one brother who was just a newborn at the time, and move us out to the country. So
Yeah.
we lived. Yeah.
So you were about 3 hours away. Your dad was an iron worker, right?
Right. Yes.
And then he obviously started working at the Bruce power plant, and you guys relocated. You bought a house there. Your
That's
family
right.
did anyway. Okay. How long did you live there?
We were there, I want to say 11 years. Yes. Sorry, no, 9 years actually. Yeah, no, I was 11 when we moved back. So yeah, we were there for 9 years until the mid 80s. And mid 80s, hard times hit, jobs started drying up. And, it was one of those things. Initially, the Bruce power plant was supposed to provide jobs for 20, 30 years. Things started to change and the jobs started cutting back. So then it's basically everything kind of happened in reverse. My dad started working back in the city in Toronto again. So again, doing that 3-hour drive. So he was home on weekends, living down in the city, sometimes with family, sometimes out of a trailer park. And again, with times being bad, it took us a year to get out of the town and move back to the city. So
Right.
we followed the power plants.
Right. So you're living in a little town off the shores of Lake Huron.
Yep.
And you grew up as a small town kid.
Yep, 6,500 people.
Right. So then at the age of 11, so what are you, grade 6 at that point?
Grade 6 in the city, yes.
Okay. So you moved back down into the big city and you spent the rest of your school years in the city. So take us through that. You ended up going to high school.
Yeah, I finished elementary school in Scarborough, did high school here, went to college, did a legal assistant program, got a job at a big law firm. Spent the next 25 years of my life at that same place. A couple of changes here and there. Switched to another, and I'm still working in the law firm environment today.
Okay. So you're in the city now. You're finished high school. You go post-secondary. You get your degree in law. You have 2 younger brothers at this point, right?
That's right. Yes.
Okay. Tell us about how you met Maggie.
Yeah. Well, that's, I had started my job and, I moved out of my parents' house. So I think I was the first one on both sides of my family to, move out and be out on my own, which, for a lot of our European community, that was a bit of a scandal.
So how old were you at this point?
I was 22. when I moved out of my parents' house to live on my own.
Okay.
Lots of questions. Why are you leaving your parents? It's like, well, it's nothing to do with my parents. It's about wanting to be on my own.
Sure. A certain level of independence, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I started to live, and I was working full time. I started to travel, and it's funny. I tell the kids this all the time. It's life is about living, and I think that's probably something that'll come up a lot. In these conversations. And I traveled. I did, Y2K came around, and I did a big trip, and I went by myself and did a tour of Spain and Portugal as part of an organized trip. And I came back from that trip, I was high on life. And I was talking about that trip to a friend of mine, saying how great of a time I had, and I can't wait to go traveling again. And she said to me, "You know what? You sound just like a friend of mine." And she loves to travel. She's Portuguese like you are, except she thinks she's Irish. Even though she's Portuguese, she's a vegetarian.
Well,
She lives with her mom. She takes care of her mom. My mother-in-law is in a wheelchair, so her life was at home. Her life was taking a lot of it was taking care of her mom, and she didn't fit that traditional role, idea of Portuguese. Again, I was high on life, and I said, you know what? Yeah, sure, I'll meet this girl. I didn't even know her name, and so my friend set us up on a blind date. So we had a blind date on a Thursday night. Met at a restaurant. She had her escape call all set up. So, a few minutes in, she had to go to the washroom. And I thought to myself, oh, damn, if she doesn't come back, then I've screwed this all up. But she came back and said everything was fine and sat down. And honestly, what felt like 20 minutes later, our waitress came by to say, you know what, the restaurant is closing. Can I give you guys your bill? It's time to settle up.
so
It
you
had
just got
been
lost in a conversation.
We got lost in conversation that just flowed, and what I thought was maybe an hour at the restaurant, we were there for 4 hours and closed the restaurant on our first date.
Wow.
And really, on our second date, we met for brunch 2 days later, and by the end of the second date, we were already talking about getting married, and
Wow.
we were planning a wedding.
Steve, I'm learning a lot right now. Um, so this moved rather quickly. So you guys just gelled. It was one of those things where you just got along, you clicked,
We
and
just knew, it was just one of those things, things clicked, things fell into place. And I'll say it wasn't even just me. The first time I introduced her to my parents, I had my parents over for dinner at my apartment. And before the night was through, my mom pulled me aside in the kitchen and said, Steve, she's the one.
we like
You
her,
know, everybody knew. Yeah,
right? So I mean, it's nice when you get that feeling, not just for yourself, but when the family's involved and they're all feeling the same thing. I mean, it's
absolutely. Yeah,
special.
exactly. Yeah, we just knew it was meant to be.
So
And I
tell
know
us.
it sounds corny, but it really, it was.
Well, listen. Sometimes I think people just connect, you know, and that vibe is real. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Maggie? Who was Maggie? Tell us about the person that you fell in love with.
She was, like I said, in the introduction, she was Portuguese like us. She thought she was Irish. She had a love for everything Irish. She did Irish studies in university. Big thing. She was a huge U2 fan. She would have done absolutely anything to be Mrs. Bono. And throughout our whole marriage, we used to joke, if he will take her, I will drop her off and pack her bags, and that's it's fine. That was her, her thing. Um, Vegetarian didn't quite stick, but at the same time, she was not a foodie. She eventually started eating chicken, but it had to be burnt. I was always prided myself on being a good cook, but hers had to be the first on and the last off. Otherwise, she wouldn't touch the stuff. She loved her charitable causes. Especially in her youth, she was not one to shy away from helping literally a stranger in need. My friend will tell me that, I think when they were in high school, she literally got in between a man who was beating his wife and told him to stop and leave her alone. And her friend was staring. He's like, he's gonna start hitting you. Like, what are you doing getting in the middle of this fight on the street? Um,
So there was no self-preservation. Just she just
she just
her
she's
emotions took over, and she did the right thing regardless of those consequences.
she saw somebody in need and she just had to jump in and help, even though she didn't know who they were. She volunteered at the earlier before we met. She volunteered with the landlord and tribunal committee. She loved working with people who were having trouble with their homes and at risk of being kicked out. Uh, she was definitely the liberal freedom fighter that most of us in our teens and 20s kind of wish that we could be.
Right. Are these some of the conversations you guys had early on? Is this what you discovered about her that really drew you in?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of that it did. It was very appealing. That I loved her passion for those things. Like I said, she was a huge fan of you too. Every time they dropped an album, she would say, "Okay, listen, I need to clear 3 days in my schedule, and I can't talk to you. I need to be in a room by myself with headphones." And she would absorb the lyrics, and she would absolutely absorb everything. She was the things that she was passionate about. She was incredibly passionate about, and I
So,
like to think sometimes I was that thing too.
I'm sure that's probably where the connection came in, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So you guys meet. You're you find a way to connect real quick. Emotions start going. You can see yourself living with this woman and developing a family. At what point did you guys actually decide to get married? How long did you date? How old were you? Tell me about that.
We met, yeah, so I was 22 when we had our blind dates. Like I said, we on our second date, she thought she was being really cool, but "Oh, let's take a walk after our date, and let's walk in this direction." We were halfway there when I realized she was guiding us back towards my apartment.
Okay,
She wanted to see where I lived. She wanted to see if I was the typical guy living in a messy place and takeout containers everywhere. And yeah, by the time we got back, like I said, we were talking marriage. We were saying, you're this is it. This connection is so strong. So we were already talking marriage, and we knew we wanted to marry each other. We kept it we kept it a little bit quiet at the time. Partly because we thought everybody would think we were crazy. Partly because her sister was engaged at the time, and we thought, we can't. We don't want to steal her thunder. She was getting married later that year, so we thought, what? At least on her side, we're going to keep it quiet until after her sister gets married. Let her have her moment, then we can have our moment.
right.
So I proposed. I guess we did the ring, and the proposal, I guess, was maybe 10 months later. So now I'm 23. She was older than me. She was 3 years older. Yeah, so we did a year and a half proposal until we actually tied the knot
So
in April.
even though you guys talked jointly about marriage, was there an element of surprise, or was that not even there? Like she just expected it.
She expected it. I mean, we knew. She didn't know when it was going to happen. She didn't know what the ring was going to look like. We tried to help. We did try to maintain some elements of surprise. We still need everybody still needs a little bit of romance in their life. Um, but yes, when I did finally pop the question, I think we both knew that the answer was already going to be yes. Uh, yeah,
So knowing Maggie, I can almost imagine her saying, "It's about time."
it kind of yes. And I remember she had actually stumbled across something. I think I'd written something somewhere or posted somewhere that I was going to propose at the end of October when we were going to do a weekend away in Montreal. So she was actually expecting it to be while we went away. And to be honest, I thought, what? It was a few weeks earlier, and I thought, what? And it's kind of funny that we're doing this now too. But saying, what? It's Thanksgiving this weekend. We're going to be seeing everybody on both sides of the family anyway. Might as well just propose now before we see everybody, so we can take advantage of the family events.
Right. Have something to talk about and discuss, and something to look forward to and plan as a family.
Exactly. So I still managed to get a bit of surprise in there, even though she thought she found me out.
Right. Okay, so you guys get married. What year did you get married?
It was
I should know. I was
2002.
there, but
Yep. Well, with our family, there's a lot of weddings, right?
yeah.
Yeah, it was 2002 we got married, so just a little over 2 years after meeting.
Okay. And then you guys get married. You think, I'm going to live happily ever after. We're going to have children. We're going to raise a family. We're going to do the traditional, raising the kids, doing homework, all this kind of stuff. So tell us a little bit about that. You have three children.
Yes, yeah. So we got married in at the spring of 2002, and within a year we bought our first house together. We had her mom living with us. She needed to live with somebody, so she lived with us for the first couple of years. So we kind of missed out on that traditional couples honeymoon phase. We had somebody to take care of, so we couldn't go away for spontaneous weekends. And so we didn't. The good side of it was, we decided we didn't wait to have children. We're already in that kind of caregiver role. We might as well let's have kids right away. So my oldest was born in 2004. Um, Next kid was 2006, and then number three was 2010. So yeah, we had them pretty quick, and she was, my instinct is to say she's a great mom. Um, and not to disparage her, but this is, was one of the fun, quirky things about her is she would always describe herself as a good mom.
Okay.
Our whole relationship.
Self-described good mom.
She said it was a good mom. We used to laugh all the time whenever Mother's Day would come along. Maggie was a very sarcastic person, which was, again, it was something I loved about her, that sarcastic sense of humor. We would go into the stores and we would see the racks of Mother's Day cards. And she would roll her eyes and she would laugh and say, all these stupid cards about you're the greatest mom in the world. You make all my favorite foods all the time. You're always there to greet me with hugs and kisses and blah, blah, blah. And, these beautiful, Martha Stewart, June Cleaver type moms. And she would say, you know what? Where are the cards for the good moms? Thanks, mom, for putting a frozen dinner on the table, every night. Thanks for, teaching me, how to be safe at school, how to do, average things, not this superstar mom ideal that nobody can live up to. She always said, where are the cards for the good moms?
Right. So she didn't want anything sugar coated.
She did not want anything sugar coated. And she knew, and she was comfortable with the fact, you know what, I'm a good mom. I do everything I need to do. I love my kids. But no, I'm not showering them all the time. I'm
Right.
not going over the top.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. Let's move a little bit into um, why we're here today, okay, and where your story took a turn, okay. So you're living the typical family life. You're married, you have a house, you're working, you have good jobs, you have three kids. What happens next? Tell us about how things changed for you guys.
Yeah, I think you said it best. Is, what, it's you. I think for all of the listeners, what you do. You are living an absolutely normal life. We were so boringly normal. We both worked. The kids were in daycare. We worked. We picked up the kids. We came home. We had dinner. We watched some TV. Maybe a kid had a soccer game, and then we went to bed. And then the next day, we just did it all over again. It was so boringly normal, just typically normal for everybody. And then summer came along. I think it was summer 2016. Some of these dates get blurry, and some of it I think is, I don't necessarily want to remember dates. I purposely didn't look at calendars a lot because I didn't want those dates burned into my head. We had rented a cottage for a week in the summer, and some of it will stick out very much in your head. And we were in bed one day, and I think it was in the morning, and she said, I think I feel a lump in my breast. And, we didn't think too much of it. And she kept checking. She's like, I'm pretty sure I've got a lump in my breast. And so we came home from that trip and began the first of many doctor's appointments. She went for that first appointment. She went for a mammogram, and she had done mammograms a few times before that. Nothing had ever come up, and so we did that first appointment. And he said, "You know what? It's probably breast cancer."
This is your family doctor,
This actually at that
or
point
her family?
she had already referred us to, I guess, to an oncologist.
Okay,
Yeah,
so you go to the oncologist. The oncologist does the mammogram.
yeah. Says, yeah, it's probably breast cancer. They did. Oh my god, now I can't even remember what it's called. Uh, the biopsy.
Yeah.
So he did a biopsy to determine a little bit more of it, and then yes, sure enough, the diagnosis came back that it was breast cancer, and it was stage 4 breast cancer
So,
already
Steve,
at that point.
were you with her at this point when the oncologist is giving you this news?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
we
so
had.
so
I had gone with her to all of the appointments. Yeah,
right. Okay, so I just wanted to focus a little bit on that because I think it's so
yeah,
important because we live every day, wash, rinse, repeat, and we're going through our normal life and we're raising kids, and then something like this happens. And it's not something I've said this before. You can't prepare for this. There's nothing. There's no book you could read that could prepare you for something like this. So just walk me through you sitting in that oncologist office or wherever you were, and the oncologist says, "Maggie, you've been diagnosed with," and tell me about that experience. What went through your head? I'm not sure if you can speak on her behalf, or maybe you guys had a
yeah.
discussion, but how did you feel? How did that rock you, so to speak?
I think a lot of it really was just shock. As you said, life was so normal. We had been going to work every day and then doing stuff with the kids in the evening and then going to bed and watching TV. And it was that wash, rinse, repeat. And then all of a sudden, like I said, it started with those words, I think I feel a lump in my breast. And then the doctor confirming it and saying, yes, it's breast cancer. There's so much shock and just kind of disbelief that, you know what, like 2 weeks ago, our lives were so normal. Um, you know, the we're at the doctor's office. I don't remember what time. I mean, it might have been 3:30 in the afternoon. Like, but yesterday at this time, I was just at the office doing routine things.
Right.
And now we've got this diagnosis, and we already know. I mean, we know enough from TV and movies and the media, and yes, and friends and family, of course, who have gone through some things. Is our lives are going to completely change now. We know at that point the first thing was, the first step was, okay, we're going to do a lumpectomy. Like, oh my god, okay, so now we're talking surgery. Like, we've never, she's never had to have surgery. Neither of us had ever had a surgery at
So,
that
Steve,
point.
let me just interject here for a second.
Yeah,
But is this subsequent to your doctor visit, or are you guys still at the doctor's office and you're just absorbing this, having this conversation?
a lot of it, I think, it's been some of it is starting to blur as the years move on, but
Right.
things moves very quickly. Once he gave us that diagnosis of, stage 4 breast cancer, and maybe we didn't even know the stage at that point until after the surgery. Now I'm not 100% clear on that. But once the biopsy results had come in and he gave us that diagnosis, it was okay. We're good. You need to come in. We're going to get you in for surgery in like 2 days.
Wow.
It was within the week. And again, we didn't know a lot. You hear the term breast cancer all the time, and, again, bits and pieces you remember in such vivid detail. I remember the doctor saying, to say the word breast cancer doesn't really mean anything. It's like saying you own a car. There are so many models of car out there, and the same thing, breast cancer comes in so many, a ridiculous number of varieties.
Right.
So you have it. And we didn't really understand what stage 4 meant. And we knew it sounded pretty serious. Um, but we were also confused. It's like, well, how can it be stage 4? Like, what happened to stages 1 through 3?
Hmm.
How could we not have, how could we not have noticed that something was already happening in the body for all that time? And she would think, but she'd had mammograms, I think less than a year before.
Wow.
Why? How come nothing came up in any of that stuff? How come there were no other symptoms? But it was faced right away with that. Yeah, it's stage 4.
And so the oncologist tells you it's stage 4. You're trying to absorb all this. You quickly realize that surgery is needed. He wants you in as quick as possible. Um, Now, you guys have 3 children at this point.
That's right. Yeah.
How old were you guys and how old were the kids? Because what I'd like to know is, how does somebody have a conversation with their children at that age?
That's, at the beginning, we kind of tried to do it in secret. We tried to keep the kids from knowing. Um, so again, I've got to do some math here. I guess my oldest was 12. So the kids were, I guess, 12, 10, and 6 at the time of the diagnosis, which again puts me at 40, 41, I suppose.
Right, so they're all in elementary school still?
They were all in elementary school. So, we scheduled that first surgery and we managed to get it. I do remember that it was in the afternoon. And to be honest, we didn't tell the kids anything. You know what? I took the day off work. We just told the kids, daddy's taking a day off work today. They
Right,
went to school. I took her to the hospital probably late morning around lunchtime, and she had the first of many surgeries. She had her lumpectomy, and then she wasn't ready to come home. Um, there were, I guess, some complications. We found out later that there was still cancer in the margins, which eventually led to a full uh, uh, mastectomy on the one side. And so, yes, that's to go back to your question. That was when I was first faced with having to talk to the kids.
okay.
Again, my youngest was,
Maggie's in the hospital?
Maggie was in the hospital.
Okay,
She ended up staying overnight. It's like, well, we can't hide this from the kids.
right,
I
so you
have to
guys made that
explain why
decision.
mom's not here.
Right, you made that decision together that, we gotta get them involved in what's happening.
A little bit, yeah. So I kind of had to. Well, I mean, she was out of it. So yeah, it was a little bit of joint decision, a little bit more on my part. We didn't say anything to our youngest. That's 6. We thought, what, that's 6 is very young, and we didn't want to scare them.
Right,
I did. So I pulled. The kids had been at my parents. I pulled the other 2 aside and I said, listen, mom's having to spend the night at the hospital. She had a little surgery, and some of it comes back to our attitude. We said, I told them, like, look, it's, it was cancer, but we caught it, and it's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. We hear about breast cancer all the time.
right.
We hear about the runs and the walks and all of the telethons, and I talked to coworkers, and I had a lot of people. Oh, you know what? My wife had it. My mom had it. My sister went through it, and all of these stories were amazing in that, what, she went through it. It was hard. She did her treatments. She got better. So we kind of, a lot of it, we went through that attitude of, what, this is, in today's day, getting breast cancer is like getting a really bad cold.
Right, the technology and the advancements with medicine and treatments and everything like that,
Exactly. So we were trying to
you
take
can't
that
help but not
attitude.
be optimistic, right?
That's right. We were trying to be very optimistic that, what, everybody seems to get it and everybody gets over it. Everybody gets through it and they get past it. So really try to, despite being 10 and 12, try to impress that on the kids too. You know what? Lots of people have had it. Some of the people in our family had already had it and gone through it. And we were able to rattle off a couple of names and say, you know what? She had it. And look, she's fine now. And mom's going to be the same way.
Right. And so the kids take this in. I'm sure they take you at your word. And does it affect them at all, or is it just like are they overly concerned about it? Did they take you at your word? How did that end up?
As best I can remember, they took me at my word. There weren't tears. The kids are kids. They're to a certain degree they're oblivious, right? I mean, they'll hear the news, and then you know what, their favorite show comes on TV, and they've kind of moved
Right.
on a little bit.
Yeah. At that age, they may not even. really
They can't
appreciate
comprehend.
the significance of this type of diagnosis.
Exactly, yeah, and
Yeah.
so they missed her that night, but the next day she came home and, obviously she was recovering from surgery. She wasn't exactly, full of great spirits, but the kids came home from school, mom was home, everything is right in the world again as far as the kids were concerned.
Right. Okay. So Maggie comes home. Um, she's just had surgery. Now you said that she had to stay in the hospital a little bit longer because they found a little bit more than they anticipated.
That's right. Yeah. I guess once they got the results back from that initial lumpectomy, they realized that yes, there were again these key phrases that stick with you, that there were cancer cells in the margins. So they got her back. I want to say probably within 2 weeks to remove the rest of the breast. They had initially hoped to preserve at least some of it, but in the end, no, there was too much cancer, so they had said we need to remove the entire breast.
So
So
within
she
a
went.
couple, so within a couple of weeks, she actually had two surgeries.
That's right. Yeah, I would say yeah, they were both beginning of September, and I think by the end of September she was back in for the second one. Yeah, had barely had time to really heal from that first one.
Okay.
And then after that surgery, they, again, when they got the test results back from from everything they had done, they told us, okay, it's time for, chemo and radiation. But we were warned at that point that, what, they had found during the surgery, they had found some cancer cells in the lymph nodes. And so they kind of prepared us for that idea that, what, being in the lymph nodes means that it's possible that the cancer could have already spread to other parts of her body. They got as much of it as they could, but really only time would tell. And hopefully, chemo and radiation would kill everything. But being in the lymph nodes means it could potentially already be elsewhere.
Okay. So it's a lot even for me to take in now, even though I was there for some of this, not this part in particular. Uh, it would be subsequent to this, and we had many conversations. I'm learning a lot, so I'm absorbing it myself right now. So when the oncologist, doctor, the surgeon, when they tell you this, that it went into the lymph nodes and they're not quite sure, at this point, is this becoming a lot more serious in your head and Maggie's head? Do the conversations change at this point, or are you just listen? We're at the mercy of the doctors, and everything's gonna be fine, or what happens at this point?
Yeah, to a large degree, yes. Conversations did become a bit more serious. And some of these conversations happen, at least for me, happened twice because the doctor would come out after the surgery while she's in recovery, and he told me those things. And then once she was, lucid enough after, coming out of anesthesia and all that, would tell her at least some of it, but a lot of it really ended up being me having to tell her what the doctor had already told me.
So you're having to receive this information on your own. You have to process it.
Yeah.
Then you have to either listen to the doctor explain the same thing for a second time to Maggie, or you have to have a conversation with her about what the doctor has just explained to you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And at that point, you know what, I remember we had a day very soon after that surgery and we thought, you know what, again, we were still hopeful. We still, we had all the good news stories that we were aware of, family and friends, like I said, coworkers and all that stuff. But I remember there was a day very shortly after, and I said to her, "Look, this is all going to be fine, but we need to have a moment to drop our guard, um, think about the worst that could happen." We cried our eyes out, the two of us. Again, we were at home. The kids were at my parents for the day, um, and we let it all out. We said, like, "Oh my God, you know what? Like, this could go really bad. You might not survive. What do we do? And we just let all of those emotions, we let it all out. We let it flow. And once the worst of those tears had come, we said, okay, look, we've got that all out there. We've put it out there. We've acknowledged the worst that can happen. We're gonna focus on the positive. We're gonna focus on being positive. We're gonna focus on treatment. We're gonna focus on making you a success story. We've dealt with the bad stuff, and now like we're gonna give all of our attention now to getting through this.
Right. It's I find it such a tough thing to mentally um take that in because when we think of these treatments, if somebody has not been diagnosed themselves and gone through these treatments, it's very difficult for them to comprehend not only the physical, um, let's say, the physical abuse or sickness or whatever your body's going to go through, but I found that the mental aspect of having to cope with this, understand it, try to um, normalize, let's say, what your life is going to be like over these next weeks, months, years, however long it takes. That mental part is really difficult, and it's not something that you can explain to somebody or have them easily understand unless they've been in your shoes. Did you find that?
Absolutely, and it's you kind of bring back some of these memories as you're talking about this, and there's the mental and the physical aspects that really go together. For her, Maggie she was a big-breasted woman. It was part of her. Your physical part of your body is a part of your identity, and all of these tales, there are deep, poignant moments, and there are some sad moments. But I will say there are some weird, humorous moments that happen in these cases as well. As I mentioned, Maggie first had the lumpectomy, right? They were hoping to get it was enough that just to take part of the breast. And the doctor was telling me that they got a little bit out. So you know what? It's fine. We didn't have to take the whole breast. So you know what? Eventually, once everything's done, we can actually shrink the other one so that the two match and that they're both smaller. Well, I told that to Maggie, and again, like kind of like we were saying, the physical becomes a part of that mental self image. She was furious. She's like, "What do you mean they're gonna make me smaller? No, no, I wanna build it back up to be like I always was, like my body was meant to be."
Right.
She did not want that physical change. It was a big mental thing for her to have to deal with that. It wasn't in a lot of ways the having cancer was, kind of secondary. Having less of her body was a bigger thing for her to deal with.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That yeah, that's very interesting. So walk me through the prognosis now. So the doctors are telling you that you're going to need additional, not you, but Maggie is going to need additional treatments. Um, what was involved there? So you mentioned chemo and radiation.
That's right, yeah, she did both she had to do both chemo and radiation, so she did the chemo first, like a lot of other people with them, she lost her hair during the process. It was I can't even remember now, but it was weeks of treatments. Uh, she went through a lot of the typical side effects. There was the nausea, there was the hair loss. Again, the hair loss for her was huge. She always had big, thick, curly hair, and to lose her hair was a big deal. There was a while where she wouldn't have dinner with me and the kids because she didn't want the kids to see her losing her hair. She didn't want the kids to see her without any hair, and that took a while for her to get over.
Yeah. So now she's dealing with the physical struggle of this, and
Yeah,
that mental part keeps amplifying.
absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
she started losing her hair, and so I helped her, and I shaved her head, and it was a hugely emotional moment for both of us. You know, again, when you get married at 25 years old, you never imagine that at 40 you're going to be shaving your wife's head because she's losing her hair to chemo.
Yeah. It's definitely not something that we should be thinking about. That's for sure.
No, no, yeah. So
So
she went through the chemo. She got to ring the bell. She was hugely proud. She was hugely proud, but she was also, again, in typical Maggie fashion, she was nervous and shy. Before that, she would always say, it's like, oh my God, I see these people, they ring the bell and they're ringing it so loud and so strong. It's like, when it's my turn, I'm going to be a lot softer and more delicate. And, I don't want to draw attention to myself. And I was there that day when she rang the bell, and she tried to be gentle with the bell, but the nurses and the staff were like, no, 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 you've been through hell. You
right,
ring that bell like it means something.
right.
And she did. She rang that bell loud and proud. Uh, then she started her radiation treatments. And she thought it was really cool that she had to get 3 little pinprick tattoos so that the radiologist, so that they could line them up again. She thought it was going to be something badass and very visible, but again, it was pinpricks. It was just
Mhm.
enough so they could see. Uh, she went through it like a trooper. She did all of her treatments except for the last one. She missed her very last radiation treatment because, as I mentioned earlier, she was a huge U2 fan, and they were in
Okay.
town for a concert.
Wow.
And not even her radiation treatment was going to keep her from going to the concert with her best friend.
When we first started talking and you started telling me about you too, I kind of had a feeling that you were going to lead that into something. Well, so she misses her last treatment and she's like, "The hell with this. I'm
That's right.
sick. I've been through a lot. I'm going and have a night for myself, and I love these guys, and I'm just going to go have a night." So,
Absolutely. She went down. She even arranged with a friend. They actually volunteered before the show for U2's. I think it's their one cause. I can't remember what the name of it was. So they volunteered for a few hours and for that, and then enjoyed the concert. And she had a fantastic time.
I think that's
Uh,
amazing.
she figured she had done all but one of the radiation, and she's like, you know what? I'm good. It's time for me to start living my life.
Right. So the oncologist said, "Yeah, one is not going to make that much of a difference. Go enjoy yourself." Did they
That's right.
redo it, or was it pushed out, or did it just
Uh,
kind of
they
get
did, I
canceled?
think, reschedule it for a week later. I can't even remember. I think she may have gone for it, but
Okay.
maybe actually not. Yeah, yeah. But yes, but by then it was done.
Yeah. So after all this is done, I mean, she's had 2 surgeries. Your life is flipped upside down. I just need to catch my breath here because um, she does her chemo treatments. She does her radiation treatments. You guys have been through a lot. So how long from the time you were diagnosed, let's say from the time not this time Maggie was diagnosed, her surgery, the first surgery, until she finished her last radiation?
I want to say it was about 9 months or so. It was a little under a year.
So this happened, it was condensed.
It was all very, very quick. Yeah, yeah. First surgery, second surgery. As soon as she was healed enough from the second surgery, which might have been only 4 to 6 weeks, and I said, you know what, we need you to be healed enough from the surgery before we can start putting you through chemo. Yeah. So all very, very quick. Yeah.
So her last chemo is complete. Um, Now you're waiting for news from the doctor to tell you how effective everything was. Is that pretty much?
Yeah. So they finished all the treatments. They did some of the blood tests, and they basically said, you're good to go. We got that good news, and we thought, you know what? Hey, we did just like everybody else. We've gone through the surgeries, we've gone through the treatments. Um, we're on the other side of it. Now comes the recovery. She was home for about a year. It takes a long time. Uh, for those who haven't been, it takes a long time to build up that strength after the chemo and radiation have really destroyed the body. She eventually even started going back to work on a part-time basis. We tried to really live that year. We did a family trip to Myrtle Beach in the summer, And I remember her saying, she's like, "Oh, we can't afford it. I've been off work all this time." I was like, "Listen, we've just been through hell and made it through. We can't afford not to. Like
Right.
we need to celebrate that, that you're alive and that you're healthy and that everything has turned out okay."
So
Uh,
let me ask you this.
yeah.
Um, you just went through a roller coaster. I
Mhm.
mean, you went through you go from living the typical, normal, everyday life of doing homework and having dinner and going to work. You get steamrolled with this news of the breast cancer. You go through, let's call it just shy of a year of treatments, struggle, physically, mentally. I mean, your life is basically flipped on its head. Everything is done. You should be on a high right now. When you guys finished your treatments, finished the radiation, was there anything that went through your head or Maggie's head that you guys perhaps conversed about that you can share with me right now that changed your perspective on life?
Definitely, an appreciation for how quickly life can turn on a dime, right? Like I said, that one instance of saying, "I think I feel a lump." Life is just it's normal and everything and every day, common one day, and then it just flipping. And definitely, we were aware of that. We knew, like, yeah, life can be so fleeting. Life can change on a dime, and you appreciate everything a lot more.
Yeah, it's the
You
little things,
appreciate your
right?
health. Absolutely. Appreciate the health. You appreciate the time together. You appreciate time with your family.
So the normal things that we would have probably just dismissed or taken for granted, they become right in your face now.
Oh, absolutely. Exactly. It's like, yeah, you know what? Maybe we don't both need to go to the soccer game today. It's like, no, you know what? We're both going to go to the soccer game. We're both going to watch the kid play a game.
Yeah. So would you say that you valued time
Absolutely.
a lot more than before, let's say?
Time together, became so much more important. We said, again, the normal course that much of the world goes through, is marry, have children, save up for retirement. Work throughout your entire life. We'll rest when we're retired. We'll travel when we're retired.
Right.
But we had at that point, we'd already had that glimpse of, what, life can change on a dime. We don't, the future is not guaranteed to anybody. Um, we've been putting off a family trip to a nice beach location for years. We had never gone to the Caribbean as a family. Uh, Maggie's Maggie's only time on a plane, her last time on a plane had been our honeymoon because we kept putting everything off. And once we got that news that, what, you've done the surgery, you've done your radiation, you've done your chemo, and now it's regular checkups to ensure that things aren't, that have things haven't returned. You're good to go. You're normal. And we said, okay, let's do it. You know what? We may not have the money now, but we got to do it anyway. We've been handed, some good news. Let's spend that time with the kids. Let's
Right.
make those memories of, building sandcastles on the beach. Whereas without all of that, we probably would have kept putting it off.
Right. So your perspective on life changes. You realize the importance of every day that that sun comes up. You're going to appreciate it. You're going to do things together. Um, you're not going to put off until tomorrow what you can do today, as that saying goes.
Absolutely.
And you get back to, I'm going to call it a normal life.
Mostly normal. Yes. We were still dealing with her hair started to grow back in. She used to laugh, said it's like baby hair. It's so soft and thin. It wasn't her thick, luxurious curls anymore. It was we figured her hair was changed forever now. It was a different texture. The color was even a little bit different. Um, At one point, we even started to do a couple of appointments with plastic surgeons to look at doing a breast implant. Again, once the body had finished healing sufficiently that she would go through with that. We didn't get very far all the way with that. But yeah, but life was mostly normal. She until the hair grew back enough, she was wearing a wig. And even, we tried to have that good attitude. It's like, well, listen, if you're going to wear a wig, let's look at some funky wigs. We went to the hairstylist, like, you know what? I've always wanted to know what it'd be like to be married to a blonde. Let's try on a blonde wig, you know? And we tried to find some of that silver lining in some of those darker moments. But she had a bit of fun with it. She started wearing, scarves on her head. And she wasn't just going to wear plain old black scarves or single colors. She looked for the brightest colors and boldest patterns. If I've got to do this, I'm gonna do it and try and make it look good.
Right. Let's have fun.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. So at some point, um, your life changes again.
yes.
So
So we
walk
had our kind
me through
of, yeah. We later that same year, so she had started going back to work. She her work was amazing, and she was able to start, half a day and then 1 day a week, and slowly start building up. And I think she'd gotten to a point she was doing about 4 days a week. And again, with that attitude of, what, let's live life. We thought, you know what, we're going to take a second honeymoon. Again, she hadn't been on a plane since our honeymoon.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
awesome.
she still loves her Irish stuff, but now with Outlander on TV, she was all about the Scottish.
Okay.
So we booked a trip to Scotland.
Well, you're still in that same part of the world.
We're still in that same general vicinity, exactly. Um, and and again, there was kind of that hemming and hawing. It's like, should we do it? Should we not? Maybe this isn't the best time financially. And you know, whether it was seeing what was ahead of us, I thought to myself, you know what? I told her, listen, I'm going to book the tickets. I did not get any insurance, and I'm booking the hotel without, with no cancellation option. We are going come hell or high water. And we did. We went. She had been starting to complain even before the trip. She was having some back pain. And she would say, you know what, it's nothing. She started seeing physio. She's like, I was in bed, I was trying to pick up something from the floor, and I just felt, a muscle pull or something. It's no big deal.
Yeah. So sometimes what happens is, you can tell me if I'm on track here or not, but sometimes what happens post these treatments is so much happens to our bodies that we just think it's part of it. It's just normal. It's just not that serious.
Yeah,
It's an after effect of the treatments.
yeah, exactly. It's just, yeah, my body's tired. I haven't been moving a lot for the last year. Of course, you're going to pull a muscle. It's not a big deal. Our trip went on, and by the end, she spent half the trip in the hotel room. She was using hiking sticks. She could barely walk. It was becoming really, really painful. The plane ride home, she stood for the whole flight because it was so painful to sit down.
So
She,
Steve, this is
yeah,
about a year after her treatments.
but yeah, almost a year after being cleared. Yeah,
Okay. So at this point, you're going to the doctor every 3 months for regular checkups.
I
You're
think it
keeping
was
an eye
every
on
three.
things.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
and
Okay.
everything had been progressing normally,
Yeah.
or
So
everything
sorry
was
to
fine.
interrupt you, but
Yeah,
yeah, I just wanted to catch up a little bit on that. But okay, so
yeah.
go
No,
ahead. So
that's important.
you're on
Yeah.
your way home now.
So we're on our way home, and finally she goes to see massage therapy and other physical therapy. Nothing seems to be helping. Everything seems to be getting worse. And then finally, one day we went to the family doctor. I went there for that appointment. And the family doctor, again, these words that stick with you forever, he said, you know what? Let's send you to the hospital for x rays just to rule out that the cancer might have come back. And so we drove from the family doctor to the hospital for x rays. He gave us a requisition. Uh, we did the x rays. We waited there for the results. And the doctor came and said, yes, there is cancer sorry, there is cancer
Take
in
your
your
time.
spine, in your hip, in your liver, and in your collarbone. and she didn't see the outside of the hospital again. We, I think it was the next day, we saw her oncologist there, and the oncologist said to us, the cancer is back. It's very aggressive, and there's nothing more that we can do for you other than pain and comfort. And then she said, I'll leave you two alone for a little while. And when the doctor left the room, Maggie turned to me and said, Steve, what does that mean? And so then it was up to me to say, Maggie, I'm sorry. It means you're dying. And we thought, the doctor told us, you've probably got 6 months to a year. Said, look, we can either go through that time and things are going to be hard. We can get you surgery. Let's at least get you in for surgery. We can fix up your spine so at least you can walk again, and you can walk and you can have a bit of a normal life.
So at this point, she wasn't walking.
Barely. It was very painful to walk. Yeah. She would walk small amounts, but those last few weeks, we had brought a bed down to our main floor living room, and she was sleeping there. The stairs were really hard for her to do, so yeah, she'd been sleeping down on the main floor. Um, yeah, it was too painful.
So, Steve, let me slow you down for a second.
Yeah,
I mean, when someone is diagnosed the first time, and you're given this information, it's difficult to understand what's happening. You come out on the other side of it, and I can't even imagine hearing the words that the oncologist uh, spoke that day. What went through your head at that time? I mean, this is not something that. I mean, there's no textbook for this.
no, there really isn't, and
You have three kids.
yeah,
You have three young children.
yeah. When you look at the thing on the whole, you look at it as, what, we got what we thought was the worst news we could have ever gotten. And then we went through hell to get through that and get back to a normal life. And then, yeah, chemo and radiation were so hard, and you felt like giving up. She felt like giving up sometimes, but no, we got to push through. We've got lots of life ahead. We've got children to raise. And then you make it through, and there's that sense of euphoria, that, what, I did it. I beat cancer. I have the rest of my life ahead of me from now, and I'm going to appreciate life better, and I'm going to live life. And then when you get that diagnosis of, there's nothing we can do other than provide you with, with comfort and pain management. But I did it. It takes a good while, and you realize it's like, but I did everything right.
It's supposed to be this way.
Speaking for her, it's, what, I lost my breast. I did all the treatments. I had to lose all of my hair. Maggie had never been a good cook the entire time I knew her. But when she was going through her treatments, she was all about anti-cancer foods. She cooked more in that 1 year than she had in the previous, 18 that we'd been together. She was so dedicated to, eating turmeric with every meal, and vegetables and smoothies every day, because those are the right things to do. And then in the end, to get that that diagnosis was, but why and how? Like, how this, I followed all the rules. I did everything that we were supposed to do, how is it still turning out this way? And, I mean, and then you bring up the point is, how do we tell the family? How do we tell the kids? Um, when she went through it the first time, she was very private about it. You know, um, she didn't want help. She didn't want the pity, as she put it. She was strong. She was going to beat this. The two of us together were enough to get through it. She didn't want to inconvenience anybody else. Um, Nobody else needed to be bothered. We did it mostly on our own.
Yeah, it sounds like she had an extremely strong mindset of I'm not a victim, so I don't need to burden people with this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when we got that last diagnosis, I remember thinking, you know what? We're not doing it this way again. I left her at the hospital the first night, and I got in the car and I drove an hour to her sister's house. And before I left, I didn't even tell Maggie that I was going to do it. I got to her sister's house and I told her everything that had happened. Told her mom what had happened. I remember my poor nephew had happened to be in the room, and we didn't even realize he was in the room. And after giving out the whole story, we saw the poor kid was just there with a huge, white as a ghost and mouth hanging open in
Yeah,
shock at
sometimes you
everything
just
that we
get
had talked
lost,
about.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And in the end, we said, you know what? Look, I told her, we did it your way last time. We did it, in private with no help. Sorry, this time we're doing it different. And, I brought in family.
Yeah, I remember you and I having that conversation at the time. I
Yeah.
remember coming to the hospital
Yeah.
um, at that time.
Yeah. And again, bringing a little bit of humor into the sad story again, I do remember, leaving her at the hospital, meeting with one of her oncologists. She had two. She had the chemo doctor and she had the radiation doctor. And she loved her radiation doctor. And I will say that this doctor I thought she was just crazy. And, when the doctor came and found, heard Maggie's, the diagnosis, and she came to see her, down in the waiting rooms before we got a place, and, gave her a big hug and said, you know what, Maggie, like, are you hungry? Like, do you want like a Big Mac or, Whopper or something? Like, tell Steve to go out and get you something like that. Like, with the diagnosis you've had, what the fuck's he going to do? Say no?
Right.
Like, do whatever you want now.
Yeah.
Just go wild. Like, it doesn't,
There's no
nothing, at this
limits
point,
now.
nothing matters.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So how long was Maggie in the hospital until the sickness got the better of her?
All in all, it was about 2.5 months. So with that diagnosis, they told us, you've with surgery to fix your spine. So the cancer had actually completely eaten away one of the spinal column, one of the bones. They said if we'll get you in for surgery. She went into surgery, I think it was just before New Year's. She spent her last birthday in the hospital. She spent her last Christmas in the hospital. She had rods put in her spine. And the idea was, again, we can do that so that she can at least walk. She could go home and she could at least kind of hopefully live out a while normally. And because of that news, we didn't tell the kids really much of what had happened. We told the kids the cancer came back. We didn't tell them how serious it was. We didn't say it was near the end because, again, the doctors had led us to believe that she was going to have up to a year. And she and I talked about it. We discussed it and we said we had a plan. It's like, we're going to do the surgery, get her reasonably fixed up, get her home. And then once the inevitable next stage happened, then we'll tell the kids that, this is kind of the end.
Right. So you wanted, I mean, I'm just going to jump in. You correct me if I'm wrong, but your thinking at that point was there's no sense burdening them at this point. Let's just enjoy the time with them and let's just have them um,
Absolutely.
be
Try
normal
and try and
without
keep a little
trying to
bit
figure this out.
exactly. Try and keep up the normal facade as much as we could for as long as we possibly could. So she had the rods put into her spine. Then after that, she started to walk again, and I think she actually broke her hip because the cancer had eaten away enough of the hip. So they did a hip replacement. At 46 years old, she had a hip replacement. Um, she was never the same after the hip replacement. She didn't. She wasn't herself when she came out of that one. I think, and then parts of it, it could have been, it was too soon after the surgery. Who knows? They were going to start radiation again to try and slow the cancer. They knew they weren't going to fix it anymore, but it was about slowing the cancer, try to extend that life as much as possible. She was already tired at that point. She was going through a lot, and we said, well, look, can we let's check, is the cancer progressing? Is it slowing with the treatments that, they've been trying to do? And it came back that, what, the cancer is getting more aggressive. It was taking over. So all those best plans we had with the kids of, getting her home. We even had the date circled on the calendar when she was supposed to come home. She had the milestones of walking to and from the room to the nurse's station and back so many times. And she was making good progress, and I said, okay, you know what? You should be home on this date. And then things started to decline very quickly again.
So she never made it home. That didn't materialize.
She never made it home. So we went from, all of this, what, things are going to be fine. Mom's going to be coming home in a couple of weeks to, on a Thursday night, pulling the kids aside and saying, you know what, mom's not coming home anymore. The cancer is too far. Mom's not going to make it.
That's got to be the most difficult conversation for somebody to have with their children,
Yeah.
especially at your age, at their age.
My oldest was, he was 14 at that point. So yeah, they were 14, 12, and 8 at that point. I remember I came home from the hospital, and my brothers were there. They had been looking after the kids that day. And, I've never actually asked them, either they ran in fear or they were giving me the privacy that maybe they thought I needed. But I remember all of a sudden they were gone as I was halfway through my sentence of saying, you know what, mom's not going to make it.
Yeah, it's difficult for it's difficult for the family because people don't know what to say. Um, it's just so difficult to put these things into words, and I understand that. You know,
There was a time, and I think when she, just backing up just a little bit, when she was in that surgery to do, to put the rods in her spine, I remember, somebody saying, hopefully, she'll make it out of this and she'll be okay. Things should be better. And I remember breaking down and said, you know what, I kind of hope she doesn't make it through the surgery. There's nothing good after this. And feeling that guilt that's saying, you know what, this would be better just to end this quickly. You
at
know,
that point, I would imagine that your concern is her quality of life,
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
and it's a very challenging thing to accept in your head and to justify even thinking that.
Yeah. It's it's almost impossible for, again, when you're not in that situation, to think, how
100%.
how could you not want somebody to, be better after the surgery? It's like, well, because better after the surgery really isn't that much better.
It's a lot of
It
suffering.
just, it was going to be more suffering, was going to be more pain, potentially more surgeries down the road. And as it was with, having the hip replacement again, it was it was difficult. And so as I said, then, it was at the end, things, it was 2.5 months, and at the end, things progressed very, very quickly. I told the kids on Thursday that, mom wasn't going to make it. This is, you know, she's dying. On Saturday, I'd gotten a call from the hospital. She started to turn, and told the kids, you know what, you guys need to come to the hospital today. This could be, one of the last times you get to see your mom. And Sunday night, I woke them up to say, she's gone. Yeah. Which, but the blessing of time is, maybe it might have been for the best, in that sense, could she have come home and spent 6 months to a year waiting to get worse, waiting to die? In the end, when she got that last news that the cancer was still progressing despite their efforts, um, she it, it she gave up. But I don't want giving up to sound like a negative thing or any kind of weakness. It's I guess
Would it be fair to say that she accepted her fate at that point?
she accepted it. She knew that, this was it. She did her damnedest. And nobody can ever take that away from us, that she did everything she could. She did everything right. She followed all the instructions. Um, and maybe to those who believe in that, the higher power and destiny, this was her time. This was, as crappy as it is, this was how things were meant to go.
So I remember when both of my parents passed, separate times, obviously. I remember a few of our last conversations or things they said. Is there anything in those final days that sticks out in your head?
Uh, I would say probably in, a couple weeks before, we did have, again, kind of like we did at the very beginning, we had one of those serious conversations. Said, you know what, we know how this is going to turn out. Again, we're gonna let loose. We're gonna cry our eyes out. We're going to acknowledge that this is happening to us, and we're just gonna, we're gonna live in that pity and wallow for a little bit. And we cried, and we talked about how terrible things were going to be. She told me she wanted me to get married again one day. And I said, "Oh no, I'll never get married again." You know what?
I wanted you to live life.
She wanted me to live. And she said, "You know what? The kids deserve to have another mother. They deserve another woman they deserve to see a family, to see how a husband behaves to a wife, how a wife treats a husband." She didn't want them to grow up just in a single parent home. She
See
said
that?
that
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
she said she knew. She said that I had a lot of love to give, and she didn't want me to be alone.
I'm going to tell you something that I remember about Maggie, and one of the things that she said in her um, final days when I was visiting at the hospital and we were together, you and I, and my wife Bernie was there. Um, we were in the room and we were just chatting a little bit, and I remember you walked in and you said, "There's either a priest or a pastor or somebody coming down the hall at the hospital." Um, to do prayers or blessings for people. And I remember Maggie saying, "Steve, get out there. I don't want anybody in here." I don't know if you remember this. Make sure he doesn't come in here. You remember that?
Oh, I think I do remember that. Yes, she
Make sure
wanted
he
her
doesn't
last
come in here.
rites. She wanted,
Yeah.
she,
I'm not in
yeah.
the mood, she said.
Oh, there were certainly some days where, yeah, she, like I said, she was very private. Again, to bring some of the humor in it towards the end, you know, she used to say that she hated when, when that it's somebody's last days. And then all of a sudden, everybody goes to visit them on their last days and we all know we all do it, and, to say our goodbyes and to, that last time. She hated it. She absolutely hated that. So in the end, kind of what happened, as I said, she was starting to go, and while she wasn't in a position, she wasn't really able to talk anymore. She didn't say no to me, and we expected again for her to last a couple of days. And I started doing the traditional thing that most people do. I said, even though I knew it was kind of her wishes, I started messaging her friends and some of her family saying, you know what, she's only got a couple days left. If you want to come tomorrow, it might be your last time. This is what you should do.
Right. So you wanted to give them the
I
opportunity.
wanted to give them the opportunity, even though I know she probably wouldn't like it. But you know what? Everybody, we all still feel bad if we don't get that chance. Well, whether or not Maggie was aware of it, whether her spirit was aware of it, we always said afterwards, she said, to hell with that. I am not going to, and as she's saying her own words, I am not going to lie here to make you feel better about visiting me on my last days when you didn't give a damn about me the rest of my time.
Right.
And she went that night. She wasn't going to give everybody the satisfaction of coming to see her on her deathbed.
So she literally, her conviction stayed with her to the end.
Absolutely. Yeah. She knew that I was telling people to come and visit, and her thought, and yeah, her last act on this earth was to say, screw you, I'm not doing that.
So, um, Maggie passes away. You have 3 children. They're all fairly young, early teens or a little bit younger than that. Where does what happens to Stephen at this point? What do you how do you transition into that next phase post Maggie? Because there's so many things that you've just gone through, from diagnosis to no diagnosis to treatments to everything up and down, and dealing with children and dealing with family to living a normal life again, being diagnosed again, finding out, that the sickness came back and stronger and she's terminal. Like, there's so much to take in here.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that's how I felt at the beginning. Especially in those early days of, it's grief. It's acute grief. Um, there is definitely there's the trauma involved in it. I didn't know what I was doing near the beginning. Um, I had some help from family. I had help from friends. Um,
When
and
you say help, you mean someone to talk to? You mean someone to come over and help you with the kids?
I had a little bit of help with the kids. Again, my parents lived, actually walking distance from the house, so I had my parents to help with the kids. In that sense, a little bit of the babysitting, cooking some of the meals for the kids. I wasn't sure who to talk to. I was a 43-year-old widower. I didn't know anybody else my age who'd, lost a spouse.
Yeah,
Who
so
who
it
who
makes it
do I talk
difficult
to?
having conversation with someone.
Absolutely. Who do I talk to about this? Do I talk about do I talk to the 70-year-old guy who lost his wife, and I mean, but he's retired. He's not raising children. There's so many other elements that was going on, and being young and being widowed, sometimes it definitely comes with certain challenges. Um, Comes with a lot of again, humorous but very offensive things that were said to me in those early days, that from people that were well meaning, but now I try to tell people, these are things you don't tell people. When somebody in my age group, when you've lost your wife and you're faced with raising 3 kids on your own, telling them, oh, you'll find somebody else and you'll marry somebody else, is not great advice. It's not appreciated. She was a person. She was my love for 19 years. She's not a pair of shoes that I can just trade in for another one. Saying, oh, should the kids go live with your parents now? It's like, well, they're still my children. I can look after my family. I don't want to lose my wife, and then now I'm supposed to lose my children as well.
Yeah, again, going back to the conversations, um, it's so difficult for not only you in this position, but for anybody around you, whether it's family, friends.
That's right.
This is not something we could train for, so we don't know what to
No.
say. And on your end, it's hard to receive it. It makes it so difficult to receive it. Um, Everyone wants to
Everybody
lend
feels the need
support.
and wants to say something.
Yeah,
Uh, I will say, as I've learned over time, that you know what, honestly, the best thing to say to somebody in that type of situation is, "I'm sorry, I don't know what to say," because that is the most honest thing that you can actually say. That is really the truth. You don't know what to say, and you don't know how to help that person.
now, did you find this? Um, um, did you believe this after Maggie had passed, or did you also believe this when she was diagnosed and people were giving sympathies and this and that? Was your mindset the same?
I'd say a little bit, yeah. You didn't. I didn't want to hear those. The I don't want to downplay it. I don't want you don't want to hear the platitudes. You don't want to hear the usual things. Oh, everything's going to work out. It's like, well, no, things might not work out, or things didn't work out. Like I said, hopefully after the surgery, everything will be fine. Well, no, it's not going to be fine.
It's such a difficult conversation, and I think different people will receive it differently,
Yeah,
if that makes sense, because some people might want to hear those kind words. Some people might say, "Don't patronize me." Um, it's just, I think it's an individual feeling.
and you're right. You really, definitely in those early stages of grief, anger was my go-to emotion. I would get angry about anything very quickly. I was always Mr. Patience. And it was amazing how quickly I would fly off the handle in those, especially in those, that first year after she passed. And it was, sometimes you would have to step back and say, okay, these people, they don't mean to hurt my feelings. They don't mean to say something that is coming across insensitive. And, you try to take what that person is saying and don't listen to the words, but try to listen. You try to listen to the meaning behind them. They mean well. There might be, they're just saying something dumb, but the sentiment is there, the caring is there, and that's what I'm gonna try to take from it.
Right. Again, there's no textbook.
No,
It's not something you can study. It's not something you can prepare for. So
that's right.
it's it's something that you adjust, you learn, and you adapt day by day, and until things kind of settle and you process it in a different way.
That's right. Yeah.
So so where does your life go after that? Where does Stephen go after the um you know understanding that you have it? Yeah, you have a new life now. Life is completely changed. You're a single father. You have 3 children. Um,
There's a
where do
lot of
you
there's a lot of soul searching, a lot of realizing, yes, exactly. Who am I now? I spent almost 17 years. Well, I was Maggie's husband. That's who I was. That
that's your
was
identity.
that was a big part of my identity. I'm the father to my kids, but I'm her husband. But now she's not here. Who am I? Um, and eventually I did start to date eventually, and part of that really was just about finding out my identity again. It wasn't about necessarily wanting to get out there or find somebody or any of that. I remember just, it was one night thinking to myself, who the hell would be interested in a 43-year-old man with a dead wife and 3 kids? And that was kind of the beginning of just getting out there. It's like, well, am I of interest to anyone, or am I just going to be a leper for the rest of my life? And, so eventually, what I did eventually start to date. I wanted to know who I was again. And I tried to, while still grieving, also looking for, well, again, I'm 43. I've still got a whole lot of life ahead of me. The kids took up a lot of my time. Um, you know, Especially in those early days, just taking care of the kids was enough to keep me going. I have talked to other, widowed groups and talked to other people who said, you know what, I couldn't, other people say I couldn't get out of bed for 3 months. It's like, well, I didn't really have a choice. One kid had a dentist appointment 5 days later, and then another kid needed to buy something for a school project. I found time to grieve, but at the same time, there was just stuff to do. I had to be a parent, and that's, as we all know, that's a full-time job. And when you're on your own, it is very much a full-time job. And kids
It's
don't
a
let you just sit down and wallow.
it's a double shift at that point
Absolutely. Yeah.
because there's no grace for you
There
to
is
say,
no
I need to
trading
watch the kids
off.
while I go do this or something, right?
Exactly. There is no trading off. There is no saying, you know what, look, I'm tired. Can you read the story tonight? It's like, no, tired or not, the story has to be read. The laundry has to be done. The dinner needs to be cooked. Dishes need to be washed afterwards. All these things, everything it was just something, everything has to be done. And you have to keep moving.
So you had just mentioned that you had found a group, or you spoke to people who were widowers. So
Yeah.
tell me about that.
So I started again, right off the bat, actually, it was very early on. I was like, okay, you know what? I've lost my wife. We've had the funeral. What is the next step? Again, what does the textbook say that you're supposed to do? And it was, you're supposed to seek out support. So I started seeking out support. I started looking, and I found a group in my area that was actually for young widows and widowers. And that was, my first time actually being able to talk to people that were close in age, some who had children, some who didn't. And it was my first chance of really starting to find a community of people that I could talk to that get it. Um,
And I think that's important.
it is hugely important, and it's become a big part of who I've been after the fact. I've participated in more groups. Um, I've I started going to an event called Camp Widow, which now I've been working with their board and helping out with Soaring Spirits, the organization behind it. And a lot of it is working, communicating, talking with other widows and widowers, a lot of whom are young, some who are younger than I am, some who are older, and it's about that community. And like, to everybody else who's listening, it's all about, we all need community for whatever we're going through. Because when you're first when she was first diagnosed, when she was diagnosed again, we all feel alone. This is only happening to me. This has never happened to anybody else in the history of the earth, and nobody understands what it is that I'm actually going through. But the truth is that there are people out there who do understand. There are other people that have had similar stories. And we may not have things to say to those people that's going to make them feel better, but being able to just talk and have somebody listen and say, yeah, been there, I get it.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah. So there's a big difference between spilling your heart out to somebody who hasn't experienced what you've experienced, and then spilling your heart out to somebody who knows exactly what you've gone through. And like you said, whether it's been somebody who's been diagnosed and they've been diagnosed, or whether it's somebody who has lost somebody like this, um, I can completely appreciate how that connection. I mean, you become kindred spirits at that point.
You absolutely do. And with all of these senses of community, there's that sense you can be free. You can actually say the whole story. You don't have to say the story with the brave face.
You're not worried about judgment. You're not worried about any of that.
You're not worried about judgment. Again, everybody's been there. Everybody gets it. Like I said, my first time going to these gatherings of other people who had lost a partner, um, and a lot of them, are from cancer, a lot from other things as well. It's such a weird thing when you can just walk up to someone and say, "So how did your person die?" That's not a conversation you can have with normal people. it's the kind of conversation you can only have within the community. Again, with the diagnosis, like, well, how did you find out that it was cancer? Or how did you find out that this was, going to be the end? Y- You can be open about talking about those gritty details that, again, when we talk to, the normals out there who haven't gone through these things, you're always filtering.
Mhm. So life is moving on for you slowly. You're starting to adjust to your new life. You get involved with Camp Widow, you said, right?
Mhm.
Where you're meeting a lot of people um, that have experienced similar situations, whether it was losing somebody through an illness or an accident or for
Yeah,
whatever reason. Um, but at the end of the day, they are now widowed. So you have that connection. So you said you got involved with this group and you got a little bit more involved with them.
that's right. I've actually earlier this year I joined their board of directors. Yeah, and so we're in the middle of planning for Camp Widow for next year, and there's going to be a Camp Widow event in Toronto, and there's also going to be one in Calgary next year for the first time.
So is this an annual event? Do you keep in touch with people throughout the year? Are there
It is, yes. And through the different years, I've gone, I think, almost every year since 2019, since the first time. So I went the first time, it was 9 months after Maggie had died. I went to my first Camp Widow. And you know what? I thought, if nothing else, I had no idea what this thing was going to be. It sounded bizarre. And, I went the first time thinking, even if this is, a bunch of, you know, hippie hugging circles or whatever, at least I've got a couple of nights at a nice hotel away from the kids to just relax. And I went into the event. There was just a sea of people, over 200 people there, all over Canada, a lot from the U.S. And I just started making connections. I walked up to one guy and said, "You look just as lost as I am," and he and I are still friends to this day. We just spent the rest of the weekend together, and the sense of connection was amazing. And so now it's giving back. It's um, it's talking to other people when I go, helping to organize. This last year I actually helped host a panel for love after loss, and talking about my experiences afterwards.
so you find comfort in giving back?
Absolutely. Giving back is huge. This last Camp Widow being, it was being almost 6 years after Maggie died, and walking in and seeing people with lanyards that are, we everybody wears a lanyard that show with a sticker that shows how long you've lost your person. And so now I've gone through where I've got a bunch of my lanyards that go from 6 to 12 months, and then 2 years, and then 3 years, and 5 years now. And now I would go and I see other people who have those 0 to 3 months or 6 to 12 months, and like, wow, I remember being you.
Yeah, you can appreciate what's going through their head at this point.
Absolutely, yeah. And just sitting and just talking and listening to their story.
Yeah, I really believe that. I mean, the whole theme of our show here is what's your story.
Yes.
I just think it's so important for people to share it. After I was sick, um, I've just had so many conversations with people, and you get lost in them. A lot of people ask you the same question, but somehow the conversation is, I don't know if rewarding is the right word, but it's soothing to talk about it at a certain point. For me, anyway, I'm only speaking for myself. Um, you get lost in that conversation. So I completely appreciate what you're saying there.
Hmm. There's definitely that element of catharsis of, like unburdening yourself by sharing that story, and knowing that, that other person who's going through that similar experience, hearing your story, and that knowing that that person is realizing, hey, I'm not alone. This is somebody talking to me who's been through what I've just been through. And, and they're, for lack of a better term, they're on the other side of it. For somebody who has been just diagnosed or who has just lost a partner, you can't imagine what life is going to be like 6 months or a year or 5 years down the road. And talking to that person who can say, you know what, I've been where you are and I'm here now. Not that everything is perfect and rosy and wonderful necessarily on the other side, but just knowing that there is more. You
Yeah.
keep
You
going
feel a
and
level of comfort.
you feel exactly. You feel a level of comfort and you feel that, you know what, life will continue.
Yeah. So life will continue. So I'm going to let's circle back. And before Camp Widow, you were telling me that you started dating again. So just quickly tell me about dating after Maggie. Where are you now? And where's Steven today?
Well, I guess we can't talk about the dating part until we mention a little bit of what I call the PTSD,
Okay.
right? Um, when I did decide that I was ready to at least start dating again, first things first is, you know what, my profile says like, you know what, Maggie was a wonderful wife, but I don't want another Maggie. I don't want another short girl. I don't want another vegetarian. And I sure as hell don't want to date anybody who has any kind of medical issues. Um, if you've got strong allergies, you're still not going to cut it. I've just been through the trauma of being a caregiver and supporting somebody I love through, diagnosis and treatments and recovery and then diagnosis and all of that again. The last thing I'm going to do is put myself in a situation again that has that potential to go sideways again. I would say again, we can't know what the future is, but at that beginning stage, um, I did everything I could in my power to make sure that that would never happen to me again.
And this is part of PTSD. Is that where you're going with
Absolutely.
this?
The idea of thinking, you know what, I couldn't, I don't want to be in the hospital with somebody again. I don't want to sit beside somebody who's getting another diagnosis. Especially in those early days, being only a year or so out, I didn't feel I had the strength. I do remember dating somebody for a little while earlier on, and I think it wasn't even something serious. It might have been a cold or a flu, and she would even remarks like, when I talk about not feeling well, you just space out. You're just not here anymore, and it's totally it was. And when we were talking about it after, it's like, it was that protective wall just going up. You're telling me that you feel bad or that you need me to do something for you. I just can't do that right now. That that part is still too fresh, and that's the PTSD side of it. That I could not be in a caregiver type role again.
Yeah, I can appreciate that.
The day, it happened slowly. A part of it at the beginning was also just, I wanted adult companionship. I had 3 kids at home. I had 3 teenagers. The pandemic hit a year after, 13 months after Maggie died. So, I made it through that first year of grief. And then all of a sudden the pandemic comes. Now all of our distractions are taken away. That grief came back full on
Yeah.
because now
It
I'm
was
stuck at
it was a
home
very
every day,
tough
all day.
it was a very tough time for a lot of people because of that socialization factor was
That's right.
kind of eliminated.
Yeah,
And then I guess I would assume only because, but somebody in your situation who's actually trying to get out of this situation and trying to communicate with people and have conversation, and then you get shut down. I can imagine that just amplified things for you quite a bit.
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Being trapped at home, and I mean, I'm saying, maybe over dramatic language, but I felt I was trapped. I had just my children for company. If we remember those early days where you couldn't really have any visitors, my parents once in a while would come to the front porch and we would talk through the window. That's also when I saw some of the PTSD coming out in my kids, especially my oldest one. And I'd read a lot or heard a lot, when a child loses one parent, whether it's subconscious or not, is that they're always worried about losing the other parent as well.
Of course.
And when the pandemic came, I remember, there was a while where my oldest, if he heard the door open, he would come running. He's like, "Where are you going? What are you doing?" "Well, I'm gonna go and check the mailbox." It's like, "Why? Why do you have to go outside?" So I started seeing they had a fear of losing me too. You know?
Yeah, it's just a very difficult all around situation, and we touched on this earlier, but the mental part of it is real during the diagnosis, and then obviously post Maggie passing away, there's a different element of that mindset that you have to deal with because I'm sure it was a struggle in so many ways to normalize the new life for
Absolutely.
you and for the children. And I'm not sure it'll ever go away. If it did or if it didn't, I'm not sure. But I think it's what you said earlier that you just learn to accept it and
You learn
understand it.
to accept it. You try to be almost, I want to say, mature about it and think, okay, just because I'm having a pain in my stomach doesn't mean that I'm going to get cancer and die. Sometimes a stomach ache is just a stomach ache.
Yeah. But it's difficult to get your mind from wondering.
That's right. And from going to that extreme of what is the worst possible thing that this could be, you know, it does take a while and it takes effort to be able to do that. Yeah. So yeah, during those days, even during the pandemic when we could, I started going out. I started dating just again, just to be around other grown-ups. I wanted to have conversations that weren't about cartoons. I wanted to eat a meal that wasn't chicken strips and French fries. And then eventually, it became a little more serious, and I met my current wife.
That's um that's quite a few um interesting years that you've had.
Interesting is a great word for it.
Well, it's I don't want to be that that person that pretends that they know because they don't, and it's it's difficult to put these things into words that would make sense to you because I don't know.
Yeah. It's as I said, it's all of these things. These are experiences that unless you've had them, it is hard to imagine. You know, and to be honest, we would never wish these things on anybody else.
Well, Steve, before I say I'm going to leave it there, I'm going to ask you um, if there's anything that you would like to either say or communicate to somebody out there who possibly has you know been in your shoes or is in your shoes right now or is going through a similar type of struggle. So people within our community, but more specifically in your community, is there anything that you can leave?
I think the biggest thing really it's about community. Whether you're at that initial diagnosis or that kind of last diagnosis, or whether you've kind of seen the worst of it in my situation where you're now widowed from that person who's gone through something, life altering, something serious. There is support out there. There are people that you can talk to. There is community. There is community for everyone. Going through any of these things alone is so difficult, and it's draining. Um, I mean, you can speak to a side of it more than I can. I can only speak on Maggie's behalf, but she went through so much being the person diagnosed, having to actually live through the surgeries and the treatments. I can't imagine what life was like on her side. And for me as the caregiver, I went through a whole lot of other things as well. And I think had I reached out in earlier stages, had I talked to other people who either had been going through it or were going through it even at the same time, it might have made things a little bit easier. It may not have changed the outcomes, but I think it would have made things easier to deal with. Certainly now that I'm involved with the widowed community, I see how talking to other people, sharing my story and hearing other people's stories has made things more bearable. So I think that would be my thing to everybody is, seek support. Listen to people's stories like this podcast. Find those support groups that are out there. Some of us, especially the men who are listening, we're used to we have to be tough and we have to hold it all in and hold it all together for everybody else. Let it out. Let somebody hear your story and listen to somebody else's story.
Well, we hope that somebody listens to your story. Hopefully, it's more than just somebody, but we hope that your story reaches somebody and they find comfort in your words and what you've been through. So anyway, well, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing, opening up your heart. And listen, Steve, I love you. We wish you all the best. And thank you so much for doing this. And we'll talk to you again.
Sounds great. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.